Me a ghost story? That sounds
Okay, so growing up, I grew up in a town right outside of Chicago. Well, my grandmother's house was in a town right outside of Chicago area called Sauk Village, Illinois. Google it, look it up. Sauk Village, Illinois was a town that was established on some land that had a very heavy Native American presence prior to it being established. Okay, now kind of set the tone for that. Now, my grandmother was from Louisiana, Creole woman, heavy spirituality as far as like, I'm not going to say voodoo because it's supposed to be a closed practice, but voodoo, hoodoo, whatever she believed in, she was a heavy believer in that. Spoke broken French, grew up outside of New Orleans, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, like very Louisiana. And if y'all know, y'all know, people from Louisiana are very spiritual on certain things. All right. So I was bad as a child. I was mischievous. I was always getting into stuff. I was the baby girl of the family. I was a spoiled brat. Okay, so this specific Friday night, I spent the night at my grandmother's house. In this house, I had two aunts, probably at the time they were in their 20s, and an uncle that was probably in his 30s at the time that lived in this house with my grandmother. This house was pretty large. Now this one night, I was begging. I wanted ice cream bar, right? I want an ice cream bar. So my aunt was like, okay, go down in the basement and get ice cream. My grandmother had a deep freezer she kept in the basement where, y'all remember the Schwan man. She would go get all whole stuff from the Schwan man, put it in the deep freezer for when her grandkids came over. So she had like all the snacks and ice cream and stuff. So I kept begging, and so my auntie was like, yeah, go down there and get ice cream. So my auntie gets up, opens the door to the basement, and pulls a string to light on. It's probably like maybe 15 steep steps going down to the basement, right? So she's like, go ahead. So, I had been down there a million times before. When I be there, I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm running down, and I get to probably 1, 2, 3, about 4 steps down. The door slams behind me. So I look up. Mind you, when I was walking down the stairs, it was nothing down at the bottom of the stairs. I'm just walking down the stairs normal. Then when the door slammed, I look up, and then when I turn back, it's a Chucky doll sitting on the basement floor. Like, not on the steps, at the bottom of the steps, on the floor. I'm like, what? It's just sitting there. So I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, I'm gonna be brave. I'm gonna go get my ice cream. Like, they're just trying to scare me. Backstory, my aunt's name used to try to scare me with watching Child's Play and Chucky movies because I was so bad. And they would tell me that if I didn't act good, that Chucky was gonna get me. Little stuff to scare little kids. So, excuse me. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be brave. I'm gonna go get my ice cream and tell them I got bash Chucky. I walk 2 more steps down. The doll starts talking. It's talking in a good guy voice at first. Nothing scary. It's just like, hey, Chucky, you want to play? I'm like, whatever. Walk a couple more steps. As I'm walking closer to it, the voice is changing and it's getting creepy. I'm like, what? So I'm crying at this point. I'm crying. My aunt can hear me crying, and she's trying to get the door open, but the latch is stuck. And I'm just screaming. The doll's not moving. It's just sitting up with a smirk on his face. And the lips aren't moving. It's just coming from the doll. And so it seemed like forever, but it's probably like 2-3 minutes. Finally, I hear my grandmother's voice at the top of, outside the basement door at the top of the stairs. And she's like, I know why y'all sent that girl down there. Why y'all playing like that? And I hear her trying to jangle the door. My grandmother was a big woman. She just was a no-nonsense type of person. She was like a big, like when I mean big, like an Amazon, like Megan Thee Stallion. She just was, you just didn't play with my granny like that. So I hear her say, why y'all send that girl down there like that? Why y'all playing with her? Finally, my grandmother jiggles it maybe twice and the door latch is open. I run up the stairs. I'm like wiping my snot and my tears all over her house coat. And she's like, girl, go ahead and sit down. Heavy country accent. So she's sitting there looking at the doll. The doll's still sitting there. At this point, now the doll is laid over like this. Like, oh, it then fell over. And she's sitting there looking at the doll. And so she tell my aunt laughing. She told my aunt, go down there and get the doll. And she was like, why? And she was like, because my aunt bought the doll. She was trying to play a prank on me, but it was something else on that doll. So she's like, go down and get the doll. So she goes down and get the doll, bring it back up. As soon as my grandmother grabs and touches it, she goes, I'm burning it. And she's like, my grandma's like, what? She's like, I'm burning it. I keep telling y'all about bringing this kind of stuff in my house. You inviting this stuff into my house. She kept saying that over and over again. Don't be inviting this kind of stuff into my house. And I was like, what? I'm on the couch crying. My grandmother goes outside in the backyard. And in her house, it wasn't rural, but it was kind of like she had a little bit of space between houses in her backyard. She goes outside, sets a bonfire, stands there in her house coat, and watches the doll burn. Okay? Comes back in the house, comforts me, wipes my tears, and tells me, don't worry about it. We're going to pray over it. Okay? And I'm like 7. I'm like, okay, we're going to pray over it. All right, Granny. And I remember that night being scared and falling asleep on the couch. She was in her rocking chair. And I remember laying there because I was so scared I didn't want to get up. I remember laying there and I remember hearing her like praying. She had lit candles. I don't know what she was burning. Like, again, I was young, but if y'all know about voodoo, she was cleansing. Okay? And I remember like dozing in and out of sleep because I was laying on the couch and she was laying in the rocking chair. And I remember her yelling at my aunt and saying, didn't I tell y'all about playing with stuff like that on this land? Like, didn't I tell y'all know this land has a lot of energy? I remember her saying that this land has a lot of energy. Don't play like that. I keep telling y'all, don't play like that. And I was just like, that was the only time I've ever had anything scary happen in that house. But as a child, my grandmother always told me I was, she never said gifted, but she would always be like, you blessed. Nothing ain't never gonna touch you, girl. You blessed. You're blessed. I blessed you when you was in your mama's stomach. She would always say that. I'll be blessed. You blessed, because I was the first granddaughter. You're blessed, girl. You're blessed. And I was just like, okay, Granny. Like, then I remember another incident happening in that house was my grandfather had died in the house prior to the first story I told you. And I remember he had a specific coffee mug he drank out of. And I remember one day my mother dropped me off at my grandmother's house because my grandmother took me to school. My mother had to go to work early. So I remember being dropped off and going in the house, and it was a coffee mug sitting on the dining room table with steam coming out of it. My grandfather's coffee mug. And I'm a little bit older. I'm probably maybe 10 at this point. So I remember going upstairs and telling my granny, like, hey, Granny, it's a coffee mug downstairs. Like, did you leave the coffee? And she was like, no. And she was so nonchalant about it. She was like, ignore it. Familiar spirits like to do things to try to get your attention. She was like, that's not your grandfather. And I was like, okay, Granny. Like, again, I'm getting older, so I'm starting to understand it, but I'm just still not fully understanding. I'm like, okay. She was like, just ignore it. If you see anything, ignore it. It's not your grandfather. She goes, I know how your grandfather feels when he around. I know when certain spirits, good spirits, are around, how they feel. That's not your grandfather. Ignore it. And she would always tell me, you ain't got to worry about it. It's not going to get you. She would always say that to me growing up. You ain't got to worry about it. It's not going to get you. You blessed. She would always say that all the time. So I say that to say I haven't had a lot of horrible encounters, but I don't know if my grandmother, she always said I was blessed. I don't know what she did when my mama was pregnant with me. Okay. But I even tell my husband that when we be watching scary movies and stuff, like, I ain't scared of this. It's not going to get me because I'm blessed. My grandmother blessed me. So whatever she did, baby, it worked.